Miss Martin Muses and Pub Crawl, another night of Pub Crawl. It is night 3, so we're in, night 4 rather, and we are in the third hour. And drinking with us tonight is none other than Shieldwall of Dragons.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm kind of excited to do this. So might not sound like it, but I am.
Oh, no, I'm excited too, and I'm really excited about the topics, and so good to talk to you. I met you first on Jacob Ironsides. I think it was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Was it that one, or
I
was it
believe
in?
so.
Yeah.
But I've
Mhm.
been watching you in the chat, and you'd been on a few other streams, I think, um, mainly discussing back when Rings of Power was coming out, and everybody was going deep dive into all the literature on it.
Ah,
Um,
yes.
is where I saw you like interacting the most online and things and saw you in the chat. But you've been in the chat for years. Uh, Same chats I have. I just might have been lurking, I guess. Um,
Oh, oh, for sure. Well, definitely the Rings of Power made us all a little bit insane for several reasons, more reasons than I can enumerate right
right.
now.
It was that show is. I mean, I if they tried in good faith and that's what they came up with, then it, I just don't see the expenditure of resources for what they got. Um, and I'm sure that not everybody that worked on that show was out to ruin it or whatever, but it was not a good show.
No.
That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah. Well, I think that we all figured it out about after the trailer came out, and we were all like, "What the hell is this? This isn't anything close to what you'll find in the Silmarillion or the Akalabeth." And then
hmm
they came out and said, "Actually, we don't have the rights to that, so we're just doing our own story." And then I was like, "Okay, that's it. That's
Right,
it."
and yeah,
It's
then they want to blame the fans for. It was they had a bad marketing uh, program. They I don't think they necessarily understood the material
no.
as deeply as a lot of other people do. I mean, that's one thing that if you're a company that you should know that if you mess this up, it is going to be a giant firestorm for you.
Exactly. Well, and
Yeah,
especially at the level that they did. I think they just thought it was
right.
just another fantasy, and they totally misjudged the whole planet.
Exactly. Yeah, it's
It
like it'd be literally like they like did a they wanted to do a miniseries on like the Bible or the Quran or something and get that wrong. You know.
Yeah, or and, like, really get it wrong, like,
Right. Right.
completely like, "Well, we don't have the rights to the New Testament, but we're gonna write the gospel Luke never wrote."
Just some of it was just so bad that the way that Mordor got made no sense at all.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't. We're not here to talk about that, but
Yeah,
just
but then
but that springboards off of what you asked, like how have I seen the show? Yes, I have. Uh, I've seen this show, and I've seen you around, and I like your takes that you have on things, and you have intelligent um, takes on things, and from what I've seen, very knowledgeable on the subjects that you talk about. So
Ah,
that's why I like your content.
well well, thank you. Yeah, and there'll be more from that, and, of course, everyone y you'll see him around, like I said, on Jacob Ironsides, Roman of the Empire, etcetera, and who else is all around? Why, it is Steve Kenobi all the way from the future, saying hello, Teresa and Shieldwall. I do hope you are both well today. Really from the future, Mr. Grant Gregory loves a good pub crawl. Ah, well, you know where to find me. And Game of Thrones with Sporking. That is correct. That is correct. Monday nights, a Sporking of Ice and Fire. Psychotic Mongoose. Hello. Cannoli Sasquatch is here. So is Ara. Everyone's saying hello to each other. And let me see. Oh, and everyone's saying hello back. I love it. Well, we have two topics that we're going to be hitting today, and we're going to start with the first one, which is growing up. Oh, in the 70s and the 80s. And before I do that, I almost forgot to share the pub in which we're meeting, which does tie in with your topic. Here we go. Why don't you tell us about this pub?
So, oh, well, thank you for finding that picture. So this is the Dubliner pub in Reykjavik, Iceland. Um, and I was there for 4 months in 2001. Um, and I actually never saw this place in the daylight. We always managed to get down there when it was dark because it was in the fall and the seasons were changing. So after I get off of work, we'd have to get a vehicle, figure out who was going to drive down there because um, we were driving from a different location um, to get there. And so by the time we arrived, it was always nighttime. And this street that it's on goes down, and there's clubs and all sorts of stuff in either direction from it. So we always went here because it was a centralized location that we could all meet up at, and with my coworkers and stuff, and then we could branch out. So sometimes they'd have live music, and sometimes they wouldn't. But it was such a nice place that there were oftentimes we wouldn't leave it for the whole night. Then other
Mhm.
times this would be like the first place you went, and then you would go to a club or something down the road. Um, and the Icelandic people were amazing. It was one of the better places I've ever been. It's also one of the few places I've been where everybody looked just like me. So
Mhm.
I would be mistaken for Icelandic all the time. Um,
Pasty white. If you're like me, that means
mhm.
so white you're practically see through.
Yes, and blonde, blonde
Ah,
hair, blue eyes. So I fit right in, and I'm
wow.
5'11" and a half, so I'm almost 6 feet. I'm 6 feet with like shoes on. So uh, so yeah, so but it was a great experience to be there. Um, Unfortunately, the reason that I was there was not a good one. Uh, we had, 9/11 had just happened, and
Mm,
so I had gone there because I was in the military for 26 years, and we got deployed there. Oddly enough, just in case the Russians did anything, which you know, so we had fighters on alert there at the base that was close to this. So uh, yeah, and Iceland doesn't have like a military. They have like a coast guard, and they have a police force, and that's it.
mm.
So but anyway, we're there to project our power anyhow. But that's what I was doing there right after 9/11. So I got there in the end of September, and we left in December. So we
Oh,
did Thanksgiving there and stuff. But it was great. The people were very friendly. It was super safe. I never felt any kind of danger. I The streets were clean. The whole place was amazing.
mhm.
The culture's great. The only kind of minor issue is they have no understanding of what an actual line or a queue is. You just kind of pile in when you go to some place. Um, but it was fun. They're very well educated. Everybody, most people speak English at a high level of competency. Um, and Icelandic is like one of the harder languages you can learn because it's basically old Norse. It hasn't changed. Um, and I was talking to somebody in this pub, as a matter of fact. I was having a pint, and they're very friendly people. So everyone's talking to everybody. And I was asking them about the language. I was like, well, if it hasn't changed, but you still use it a lot, how do you talk about like computers and stuff? And the lady I was talking to, she basically explained it as they just say the box that thinks, and
Oh,
that's how they describe a computer. Maybe she was making it very simplified for me, and I might have been a few pints in. So, but that's what I recall
no.
her saying. Um, but that's how they were able to keep. They don't. They do not let that language get changed. They don't add words to it or take words away or anything. Like a lot of other languages, that's what happens to. You know.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
for certain, I can't understand a darn thing they say because most places that I go, I can usually understand a little bit, especially if they're
Mhm,
Germanic or French based. But yeah, this is one where it was just insane. And part of the English that you were speaking about is because they are so tourist based, they have to
mhm,
have English because even if it's not English speaking people, it's the common language of the tourists that most people will know English before they would know Icelandic. And
Right. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
Stig
Stig's
says they
saying that
just say,
they say PC or Mac, but I guess it was she gave me that example when I was asking about broader questions like
hmm
modern things. She said they will just describe it using simpler words that meet the old language criteria.
hmm
The
sure.
writing was really difficult too. They had like, everything was all smashed together. It was like German where they have like the big Strufel, Hoppel, Haffelstrasse word that's like
hmm
a huge
yeah.
giant word. And but they would have that, but it'd be with letters that you don't normally see in English, like the thud sound and all that. Um, so I could read it eventually, but to kind of figure it out. But again, I was only there 4 months, but it was a very interesting place. The people were very friendly. The air was clean. Uh,
hmm
when you turned on a shower where we were staying at, you had to be careful because the hot water came straight out of the aquifer and it was boiling hot. You'd scald yourself. I could
Yeah.
cook ramen noodles in my room with just turning the faucet on and putting it into the cup, and it would totally
Yeah.
cook it. Uh, so it was great. But
Yeah. Living on a volcano has its
mhm,
advantages that way because yeah, you get piping hot water. Also, they harness it for electricity. The downside is they still erupt and cause
mhm.
issues.
Right. So that eruption they just had was out by this place called the Blue Lagoon. We went out there because it was very famous, and it's like a sulfur spring, so it stunk like
hmm
rotten eggs, but the water's supposed to be really good for you and stuff. I did not go in there. I was quite a bit younger then, so I didn't go in there because they had a go-kart racing track, like a really nice one. So me and a bunch of the guys I was with went and did that instead of going to the Blue Lagoon and
Oh
getting in
my
the water.
gosh, I'm horrified. I've been twice to Reykjavik, and I go to Blue Lagoon every single
Mhm.
time. I
Yeah.
lather all that mud all over my face. It's fantastic for your skin, and you glow. But I digress. And yes, they did have to shut it down, and I got worried. I'm like, I swear, if that volcano destroys my favorite spa, I'm going to be really ticked off.
Well, that's the thing about Iceland is they don't like they don't like change. Like if you go especially out by the where the base was, it was a lot of like volcanic rock stuff, but there were these rock columns that people had built from who knows how long ago, and you just didn't touch the stuff.
hmm
Nobody touched it at all. If that was in America, some jackhole would come and knock it down just because, you know,
Yeah.
or something. But there, they respect those kinds of things. They also had a lot of cultural things like if you went to a restaurant and had a candle on the table, you didn't blow that out for any reason because the candle was supposed to represent a fisherman's soul out on the water, and it was
Oh.
bad luck to do that. They also literally believe in like elves and trolls and things like that. So you don't upset them because they will make bad things happen to you. Um, which was kind of a juxtaposition for a very highly educated, um, you know, they had computers and everything. Um, and at the time I was there, the country's population was only 350,000 people. Imagine that.
Mm.
There are cities that are much bigger than that. Um, but that was it. And Reykjavik, they built a brand new mall when I was there. And guess where they put it?
I don't know.
Right next to the old one. So
Oh.
they were literally next to each other. And I was like, what are they doing? But we went into the mall and walked around and it was amazing. And um, also, if you happen to be a single guy, Um, it was a very nice place to be because again, they were very friendly. It was easy to just walk up and talk to people, and people would talk to you
Mhm.
um, as well. A lot of the guys that I worked with were, yeah, they were very happy there.
I I can imagine because yes, they also are very open, let's just put it to you that way, and not in a bad way, it's just the way it is. It's just
It,
and
it
very
was
frank.
right. It was refreshing, and also it was very cosmopolitan. I met a lot of people there from all over Europe and other parts of the world. Um, and but you're in the military. I was younger. Everyone else wants to go and
Mhm,
go out and stuff. So down the street, either way from this, and basically in all four directions is a bunch of like clubs, and or at least there used to be back in 2001, clubs, restaurants. There were Thai restaurants. There were shawarma places,
mhm.
places you get like doner kebab, McDonald's. The McDonald's is no longer in Iceland. It was too expensive
That's
to keep
good.
there, but um,
It's a crime.
yeah,
Shouldn't have McDonald's in Ice. Yeah.
yeah. But
Wow.
it was great. I wanted to sign up for some cultural things. There was like a couple of places I wanted to go, but work would never let me do it. There were times when we'd go on alert, and um, we were like on the opposite side of the civilian airport. There was some alert hangars over there, and
Mm,
so that's what we were doing there. Um, and but it was great, a lot of fun. I enjoyed myself, and then uh, I went back to Japan from there. So I actually
uh,
was in Japan, went to Iceland, and then went back to
oh
Japan.
my gosh.
So
Wow.
yeah, yeah, it was.
We wanna go back. Oh my gosh. I haven't been back since 2017. That was the last time I was there.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a magic. It literally is a magical place. Also,
Mhm.
the first Lord of the Rings was fixing to come out, so they had all these books, and I was so hyped to see it. And I was going to see it when I got back to Japan in December.
Mm.
So we flew back, and then within a week, the movie debuted, and I saw it in Japan with in a
Oh.
Japanese theater but they had subtitles for the Japanese on the side. Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah, so it was all in English, perfectly understandable. Uh, and even in Japan, the theater was packed. So
Wow.
that book transcends like cultures, and you know what I mean. So
Precisely. Well, and
mhm,
going along tiny bit with what we were saying about Rings
yeah,
of Power is like this story has never had trouble appealing to a multicultural audience, and that's all there is to it. Um, and I honestly don't know the answer to that. If they have a list of names for newborns, that wouldn't surprise me. Um, maybe what's your favorite place in Japan? Says Genevieve.
oh, well, I was in Okinawa, which is an island south. It's like the Hawaii of Japan, kind of. And the culture there is different. It's like the Hawaiian culture in America is different from mainland. You know,
Hmm.
kind of the same, not same. It's mildly analogous, but uh, and then I was also on the mainland in Saitama Prefecture, which is both of these had bases. One is Kadena, the other is Yokota, and I was on there because I was in the Air Force. Um, but let's see, where's my favorite? I just like maybe when I went to Kyoto, it was very beautiful. I went saw the Golden Pagoda. I saw the palaces and the castles and stuff there.
Hmm.
Um, I've been to a Matsumoto Castle. Oddly enough, Okinawa, which was its own kingdom, uh, prior to about the late 16th century, had castles on it. But it's such a small island, you can literally see the castles from each other. I guess Europe's like that. Like if you're on the Rhine or something, you can see like down the Rhine Valley, you can see the other castle, the guy you don't like. So
Yeah.
they had
Send the
that kind of
catapult over
stuff.
there.
Right. They had that in Okinawa, and Okinawa also had a big influence from China because of where it was at. So they call Okinawa the Keystone Island because it's of where it's at. There's so many different places that you can go. Yeah, like the Karate Kid
Yeah.
movie, except that was filmed in Hawaii. Um,
Yes.
and well, I guess while we're on this subject, I've also been to Turkey. I've been to Spain. I've been to England. I've been to Scotland. Um, and I've been to Arizona and New Mexico. So and I've lived in all those places. So well,
Yeah.
not
Lived in
Scotland, but England. So I lived in
Scotland's
England for
lovely.
3 years.
I'd love to go there. Oh, England. Oh gosh, yeah.
Mhm.
I like so many of these places.
Oh,
Well,
I
and this
forgot
brings
Italy too. I've been
oh,
to
Italy.
both
Oh boy.
North and South Italy. I've been up to Aviano and down to, where the boot is down there, in Italy. Uh,
Mm.
I've been to Sicily for a short time. That place was crazy for driving. If you made eye contact, that meant that, you gave them a right of way. So you just had to just drive, and people were
Oh
passing you on the right and left. It was nuts.
drive and
Um,
pray.
yeah, but it was, I mean, obviously, in Italy, we went to a restaurant which was inside a literal castle ruin, which was great. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I've been to Venice. I went to Venice for $15. That's how much it cost me because we
Oh
took a
gosh.
bus from the base, and we all went down there. It was a lot of fun. I just wish I could have broken away from the group a little more because it was like a tour. But
Oh yeah.
so we had a bunch of drunk Americans wearing gondola driver hats,
Oh
getting drunk on
gosh.
Heinekens, and but I got to go to, I think it's the cathedral there. I'm having stream brain, but there's a cathedral there that so they had the crusade. I believe it was the fourth crusade where all they did was go to Constantinople and raid it and then bring that stuff back. They didn't even go to the Holy Land or anything, and they took so much gold that they made this little room inside that chapel entirely in gold. Everything's in gold leaf,
Oh my
and you could pay
gosh.
money to go in there and check that out. When I went to Kamakura in Japan, I went inside. I didn't know this. You know the big Buddha that sits out there? It's world famous.
Hmm.
It's like a big Buddha statue. You can actually go inside it. It's hollow. You can pay money to go in it,
Nice.
and it's got doors on its
Dang.
back that open up and to let light in. Um, but yeah, so yeah, that was a great. The military gave me a great opportunity to travel. I went to all these
Mm.
places that I would have never been able to afford or even really wanted to. Um, like
Yeah.
Arizona and New Mexico. But those are also very, very great places. Lots of things to do and see in both of those. And I got to go
Well,
to
that kind of
Vegas like
brings me
15 times.
oh, of
So,
course. This brings
yeah.
me to mind a little bit, especially when you talked about using the bus to go places.
Mhm.
Topic number 1, which is growing up in the 70s and the
Mhm.
80s and how it's kinda different from today. I didn't know if you wanted to start expounding on that.
Well, here's an example. I went to get my oil changed and I drove by the high school and it was like this line of cars. I'm like, what are they doing? Parents are dropping their kids off. I was like, why aren't they taking the bus or walking? When I was in high school, we didn't. I rode my bike to
Mhm,
school, and it was like a
mhm,
long way. It was like 5 miles. Um, and you know, and granted, it was some of the time it was in Arizona, so the weather wasn't always bad. But we, yeah, the difference between. But I can understand it. The way social media is, and it amplifies everything. Like I have this belief that a lot of the stuff that's going on now happened in the 70s. You just never heard about it, you know, and it just
mm,
didn't make headline news as much. Um, a good example of this would be when I did live in Okinawa as a kid because my father was in the Air Force, so we lived there, and this was like 1981 or something. And outside the gate, there was a whole bunch of bars, and it had been that way since you know after the war. Uh, and every weekend, Marines would go out there, get drunk, and get in fights, and like beat people up and everything. Crazy
mhm,
stuff. And it was like every weekend. Now, I joined the Air Force, I got stationed there, and this was like the early 2000s. If an incident like that happened, they would shut the whole base down, everybody go on lockdown. It'd be like this big giant international incident. So it went from guys were having bar brawls like having off fights and all kinds of stuff right outside the gate, acting a fool, and it was tolerated to now everything is an alcohol related incident. If any alcohol was involved, like if you got in a fight with somebody and you were totally sober and this other guy came up to you completely smashed and like started a fight, both of you would have to go to counseling. for alcohol because it was considered an
Oh my
alcohol related
gosh.
incident. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
stuff that doesn't
Even
make sense. And I mean, but once you get rank and get into supervision, you got to figure, ways to curtail these. But also, we were a guest in that country, and the Japanese just started losing tolerance for all that nonsense. Um, but it just goes to show, like back in the '70s, you got on a bus or you walked to school. Maybe your parents drove you when you were a little kid, but once you hit like 12 or 13, you were basically autonomous. You could go to the store, you could do anything.
mhm.
Um, but kids didn't have credit cards back then, or a phone, or any means to like get themselves in serious trouble. Where as if you leave a kid now with Apple Pay on their phone that has a link to your credit card, they can get online and play some kind of game or something and rack up thousands of dollars in virtual charges trying to like, win a gun or some kind of egg that opens up no special creature for their game, you know,
Yeah.
which we didn't have back then. We didn't have the internet. We had four channels on TV and you were happy to have them. Um, the news didn't lie to you, or if it did, they at least tried to cover it up. Now
Yeah.
they don't even care,
Or we
you know.
didn't know we were being lied to. That's what I always
Right,
wonder now.
right. Well, I I don't want to get too political, but not as political as like I'm for this person or not. But as far as like philosophy, you can't run a country like you run your household. You can't run a country like you run a city or things like. There's other considerations that have to be made, especially for like national defense and things that are counterintuitive what most people might think. Like, why would I invent this weapon of mass destruction? It only leads to bad things. But if you don't, and another country does, then now you're at their mercy, right? So
Yeah.
it makes sense to do some things that might seem counterintuitive to what we're doing, like the whole climate change thing. Um, I don't believe that it's anywhere near as severe because going back to the '70s and '80s, we're old enough to remember when, oh, we're going to be out of oil by 2030. It'll be totally gone. Or,
Mhm. The
acid
Ice
rain is
Age.
going to kill everything. Yeah. Um, or that, yeah, smoking's not that bad for you, like in my
Mhm.
parents' generation. Um, so it always changes. People always have, well, usually there's a political reason to do something. Um, and there'll be parties that have counter interests to that, um, that are doing these things. And then you see other people that are only in it for themselves. But then there are other people that generally have concern for the environment, but you can't go willy-nilly and just be like, okay, we're going to go full force on this one thing or another, because everything has to be a compromise and a balance in a healthy society. You can't go one extreme or the other, and certain things take time, like how the West was won, I guess, and people, getting it to populate and move out and develop and things like that. And was there growing pains with that or some bad things happen? Absolutely, but it also allowed us to be who we are today. And um, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's the way it was. But if it wasn't for a lot of government spending back during that time, we wouldn't have moved as far and as fast as we did. Um, it's just deciding where to put those resources and how much to put is the issue, and that's, I think, where the politics really get combative and convoluted. But it's a
Yeah.
system that kind of needs to happen, at least in a constitutional democracy. It has to be in the middle. It can't be one way or the other all the way, which is what I think a lot of people want to see. And if it doesn't exactly happen how they want it, then they think it's a bad thing, especially now because everything is so polarized because of social media and the media itself. Like,
Mhm.
basically, if you turn on the news, everything has an opinionated slant to it, depending on which side of the news you're watching. Um, and that's not, to me, that's not the best way I mean, you have to have that, but basically now in the 70s you could just watch one TV show and you got all that one news.
Mhm.
Now you have to like flip through four channels to kind of coalesce all that data to make the best decision. Um, and especially with like Twitter, Twix, X, whatever you want to call it, um, you 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 can't read a post and then just take that at face value, especially with the way things are deep faked and out of context and all those kinds of
Yeah.
things. So whenever I read something and you get that initial reaction, like, oh, how could they let this happen? 9 times out of 10, you find out later that it was taken out of context, or it's not a real thing, or it's not as bad as it seems.
Mhm.
Which then leads you to having an issue where you read something and you're like, oh, it's not that bad, and that one is the one that turns out to be really bad. Um, but you weren't exposed to this much stuff in the
Mhm.
70s and 80s. You just couldn't do it. You'd have to spend all of your time reading newspapers, magazines, books. You didn't have a search engine where I could just hop on and go, "Hey, you know, who was in
This
2001 Space Odyssey? Who was this one character? And what's this actor? And who's his back?" Now I can look all that stuff up and I can get information when they were born, what movies they've been in, all that. If you wanted to know that stuff back then, you had to go get a trade magazine and go out of your way to find that info. So most of the
Mhm.
time, people just were like, I don't know. And if you wanted to have a conversation about Star Wars and how cool it was your school, your church, your work, and that was it. That was your
Mhm.
circle. There was no, maybe you could join like a pen pal club or something. Um, but there was no like this where you could go
Mhm.
online and interact with, millions of people and get ideas and different things. Um, I remember movies would come out, you didn't really hear about it unless it was, there was an advertising blitz on TV or something, or maybe it's in a comic book ad or whatever. But most of the time, it just came out. You saw it. It came out in the paper or the TV
Mhm.
guide back then. You had the TV guide, and it would show like what movies and stuff were going to be on TV.
Y Yep, precisely, or when you were talking about you had to go get a trade magazine, another way that you could do it is to go to the library, and then you'd have to look it
Hmm.
up. They might have, like, all the movies up till now, yeah, the Hollywood or the history of
Right.
Hollywood, and you have to look in the back and find the names. The paradox that we have more information than we've ever had, and we seem to have the least amount of discernment.
Exactly. So now you don't know what is true because people can just say anything, and but because people had grown up in that era, they started just taking anything at face value. Like when Facebook came out. You know how I knew Facebook is the devil? I'll tell you how I knew that social media was going to be a bad thing. Um, so this was back in 2006, and I was the section chief of my section. So I was the top enlisted person in my office, and we worked on like liquid oxygen carts and electrical stuff. And so I probably had 22 people underneath me that worked for me, um, in various positions. And so, but in the military, you're responsible for like all the aspects of their well-being too. So if they have marital problems that can affect their work, you have to deal with that because it's not like they're working at, like Delco Parts or something where they just come into work, and if they, as long as they show up and then they leave, you don't, and they did their day's work, you don't really care about what they're doing. In the military, you have to protect the image of the military. You have to protect good order and discipline. You have to make sure that they are, um, because they're a huge investment from the government. They put all this money into their training and well-being and giving them housing and all these other things, right? So there's
Mhm.
more to it than that. In a weird way, it's like kind of like living under communism a little bit. Like your rights are curtailed than what you would normally have in America. Um, and anyway, so I had this guy come in, and he's like, can I talk to you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Hey, my wife's cheating on me with one of the other guys in the shop." And okay, so this was a standard thing that happened. You're in the military, stuff like this happens. Sometimes you're on a base with not a lot of other people around, so these things happen. you know. So I'm like, okay, well, so tell me about it. And he's like, he shows me these printouts from Facebook, and it's pictures of her doing like this duck face with comments to the other guy. And I'm like, what's this? And he's like, my proof. And I was like, wait a second, you didn't catch them? Have you ever seen them together? And they're like, no. So basically, she was cheating on him with this guy virtually, um,
Oh,
over Facebook. And I was like, what's this? Facebook? I didn't even heard of it. And so he explained it to me, and I looked at it, and I'm like, okay, now I got this headache that I don't even know if these other two people have even met physically. And now this guy's having this big issue over it. So I had to work it out. But that's when I knew that social media was going to be a problem
yeah.
right then.
Well,
And
exactly. And the whole idea that words meant things. So
mhm,
yes, you did tend to believe it. It took me a while to figure out that a lot of what was going on with social media not only was not honest or not necessarily real, but it was also manipulative. And we've
mhm,
seen now how manipulative it is, where they would make us believe that we are like in the minority, for example,
mhm.
and that look, everyone else believes this, why don't you? And then we found out that most of these people weren't even real.
Or they were just a couple of people with a bunch of sock puppet accounts.
Hmm.
It, like the fact that you even have to know what the word sock puppet means, as not, Ookla Fran and Ollie or whatever. If
Yes.
if you're old enough to know what that show is, or with Lamb Chop or whatever, uh, which was basically a sock puppet of a lamb.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, they yeah, so people didn't understand yeah, exactly how manipulative it can be. And they because you see these things and you're conditioned, at least we were at, being younger, you saw something in print, that means it's real.
Mhm.
So even now people will say, well, I read it in a book, but that doesn't mean the book is right. People can get
No.
all kinds of stuff printed, and they proved it. You can get scientific papers printed in some journal, and then people will use that as their source material to cite a quote, and none of that is correct or accurate. um, or you see now with media, somebody will break the story because it's all about getting the advertising clicks now, right?
Yes.
So there's a pressure to break the story, then get it out as fast as possible. That's why there's no good editing anymore. You see spelling mistakes and missed words and all kinds of stuff, and stuff that's published on a site because you're typing it out on your phone or whatever. And they're in the speed to get it out so that you can get the ad revenue and clicks. th- all they're doing is using this one story that somebody broke as a reference, right? But
Mhm.
nobody is really fact checking the story, but they're all running with it, saying this, you know outlet broke this story and we're reporting on it now, but we got to get on it quick so we don't have time to really look into it. And the person that broke it didn't look into it because they're trying to beat everybody else to the punch. And because of the way the advertising revenue works, it's how many click throughs you have and views and all that. So they want to get that out there as fast as possible. And that makes that system very vulnerable to people that want to use it to shape the narrative, or, you know, straight up put out confusing counterbalancing or counterintuitive things or whatever, like counter stories. So, and then you put Twitter in that, when you got flame wars and people blocking people, so they'll make a derogatory statement and then block their responses so that you can't really respond, so that only that's out there. And it's just nuts, the amount of stuff that is happening. And you can find a counter to everyone's argument somewhere if you look hard enough.
Precisely. And
Right.
speaking of which, we've seen the latest iteration of this kind of clickbait and the like with engagement bait, where because now that people can get monetized based on how many people will look and click on their
Exactly what was going on with the media, mainstream media, is now going on with their average person. So they'll put out an
precisely.
inflammatory tweet just to get people to look at it.
Yeah. And even if it's not true, and
Mhm.
they'll say, "Oh my gosh, look at this person. This child, you know, died because of a jab in, blah 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 in
Right.
Israel," and they were the ones that were like, this is what I remember is like, but and they were the poster boy for it, and everyone was like, "I can't believe this. Yes, they're all evil." And it turns out it's like, wait a second, did they ever say the kid's name? Where was the article? Where
Mhm.
or people just throw out things to just upset people, even something that is contrary, even something they don't believe. And I found that sometimes people be like, "Hey, man, I know you." It's like, what's going on here?" And the person will just completely ignore reasonable
Hmm.
requests. And at
Well,
first you're
because
like,
of it,
"Well, what a total dick." And then you're thinking, "Wait a second, this person didn't do this to have a debate, to even do that.
right?
This person just wanted us to look."
Exactly, and or they jump, they rush to like that kid with the MAGA hat with the Native Americans were playing, beating the drum in front of him, and they're like, "Oh, this
Mhm.
kid's obviously, a racist and all this." And then they had the narrative completely twisted. They didn't have all the facts. They jumped to conclusions, and now they got egg on their face. So, um, also the journalistic journalistic integrity is, in my opinion, down. People just, again, it's all about trying to get the clicks, and then with the economy the way it is, it's just everything is just changing at such a rapid pace.
Mhm.
But if you're a student of history, you see that these rapid changes have happened. If you look back in history, there's just bunches and bunches and bunches of them. um, or if you're struggling in life, you can look back at, every time I have a hard time with something and I feel like things are not going my way, I think of Alfred the Great,
Oh,
in England,
yeah.
where he basically he got kicked out of his own capital and he spent a winter in the swamp, and things look very bleak for him, but he was able to come back. Genghis Khan, same thing happened to him. Shaka Zulu, same thing happened to him. Where both Genghis Khan and Shaka Zulu, their their families were basically attacked and wiped out. They were kicked out of their, and they were denied their hereditary birthrights, and but they were able to get better themselves, gather a base, come back, and wind up, you know, becoming becoming uh, leaders in their of their respective people, and they got their revenge on the people that wronged them
Yeah.
in a lot in some very bad ways. Uh, but also Alfred, he was able to gather his forces and beat the Vikings. He turned the tables on them. There's so if you look throughout history, there's so many instances of these kinds of things happen. That being said, there's also instances of where people tried to do things and it didn't work out for them and it ended very badly. Um, so
Yeah.
those,
Well, and I think what's different nowadays, because everyone, sometimes people will say, not you, but others, well, it's always been like this. And I'm like, no, we haven't had the technology in the common people
right,
to
right,
immediately do this. We haven't had the means to have such complete
hmm,
domination. Like, imagine if the Soviet Union had had the internet and social media.
right.
You
Well,
know.
the other thing is that if you go back far enough, I mean, even even just 100 years, there's some people that, wait, what would you want to bring back from the 70s, 80s if you
Oh,
had a chance to do it? Okay, uh, Coke before New Coke, and they mess with the formula because even though they say they change it back, they really didn't. Um, uh, Chips cooked in animal fat,
yeah.
they tasted much better. Um, let's see what else. From the 70s, being able to let your kids play out on the street without
Uh-huh.
having to worry about them getting hit or snatched or whatever. Trying to think what else would be really good.
Yeah, well, I think that that's part of it, and that's also what was a part of growing up in the '70s and the '80s was the phenomenon really was true. You would come home from school, and the parents would basically be, or the mom, because the dad would be at work. I'll see you when it's time to eat." They would like literally like throw you out of the house, and you weren't supposed to hang around. And if you tried to come in, it's like, nope, go out and play, go out
Right.
and run
Yeah.
around.
Yep. Yeah. There was no sitting around watching TV all day, and we didn't have screens. Now, I will say this though, we didn't have, phones and all that other kind of stuff, but we did have books. And I knew a lot of people that really, they would just read and read and read and
Mhm.
read. It was all they kind of did. Um, but it was a much safer time, or at least it appeared that way. You could just run around, and when the street lights came on, you knew it was time to go back home. and that's what you did. You
Mhm.
could ride your bike anywhere you wanted, and uh, I don't know. It was a different time. But like
Yeah.
I said, I'm sure there were kids getting abducted all the time. You just didn't hear about it.
Yeah, it was local.
Right. It was very local. That was the other thing, is everything was local. Like I remember, uh, I lived in Delaware, and we were, right outside the capital, Wilmington. But so it was still roughly a small area. Uh, but I don't. They had Doritos, but salsa wasn't like a thing.
No.
There was no Chinese restaurant, there was no Mexican restaurant. We had an Italian restaurant. We had a Arthur Treacher's fish and chips, a Kentucky Fried Chicken. KFC was not a thing yet.
Or it was
We had a
called Kentucky Fried Chicken, not
the whole
KFC.
name was called Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? Not KFC. And it was and we had McDonald's. We had like no, we didn't have a Wendy's either. We didn't have a Wendy's. We had an Arby's, and there were a lot of local, like, little mom and pop places that kind of look like McDonald's or drive through or something, but we had all that, but that was it. There was no I didn't
Mhm.
know what an avocado was. I'd never seen an avocado. I'd never seen, like, dragon fruit or monk fruit. I didn't know what boba was, or chai tea, or Earl Grey, or any of that stuff. It was all basic things. And I mean, we had like butternut squash and stuff, but I never ran into anybody that spoke Spanish or Chinese or any other language. Maybe somebody that spoke German or French, but that was it.
Yeah,
And
and that
then,
would just depend on where you lived.
uh-huh, right. Now, again, this is like, middle of rural Delaware. So, um, so yeah. But I mean, if you went up to like New Jersey, New York, then you'd run all kinds of people like that. Uh,
Mhm.
but I remember riding the bus to school, and then we had recess, and we had gym class, and we had music class, and we had art class. A lot of these things are gone now, from my understanding, and they don't have gym or art or music in certain
They're
places because it's too
trying to
expensive.
knock them off. Yeah,
Right.
it depends on where you are, yeah.
And then when I went to high school, I went to wood shop. I had a car class. I went to home ec. I learned how to type. I learned how to sew. I learned how to cook. Um, and But I kind of knew what I wanted to do when I was about 6 or 7. I mean, at first it's like, I want to be an astronaut, but
Mm.
or I want to be a bird. That was a thing when I was like 4. I wanted to be a bird, because they got to fly. It's also the same age when I thought that adults and children were like different species. Like, adults were they just came out as adults, and kids were kids. I thought that for like a couple of days. Um, I was a weird kid. I also had a crush on Tinkerbell when I was 5. But I mean, can you
Ah,
really blame me?
that's normal. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Also,
Zach's right,
yeah,
yeah,
Zach
some of
is
it
right. Yeah.
takes and I think that that's also maybe where some of the identity crisis is,
Well,
people are losing their cultures.
exactly. Or they're being exposed to so many different ones at once that they don't really. I mean, you kind of, but it depends on where you live. Like, my my stepdad grew up. He was born in Germany and lived in England for a little while, where he learned English, and then he moved to New York City. And he lived about 4 blocks away from where they filmed West Side Story,
Ah.
in the '60s. And
Mhm.
so, like, when they were filming it, and so if you lived in a place like New York, you met people from everywhere, you know. But if you lived in, rural America, you didn't really meet anybody from anywhere. Uh, I knew guys that, when I was in the service, that they said they didn't see like a person of color, like a black person or anything, until they were like 15, and or whatever. And like I said, I
Yeah,
never ran into anybody that spoke Spanish or anything,
yeah.
um, until we moved uh, to Okinawa. That was one of the great things about being a military kid and going to the military school overseas is I got exposed to a some of the best teachers. They're really good because
Mhm.
they got to be good to get over there and work for the government system. A lot of people say, "Oh, the government is, don't know what they're doing and whatever." That's not always the case. Um, there are certain instances where they have a highest standard. Just like getting in the military. Like if you were in the military and you run into somebody, well, you know that they've already met a basic standard. They went through basic training. They met a selection process. They're not just letting anybody in. And it can be harder to get in than some colleges and stuff, depending on, because you can't have done drugs. You got to pass physical fitness. You can't have a criminal record. There's all these other things that you have to meet in order to get in. So there's a standard. So once you meet that person, you know that you've gone through the same basic experience as them, and they have an understanding of what that culture is. So it's easy to like interact with them. Um, so anyway, in order to get the teachers over there, they only hire some of the best, not
Mhm.
it's just not just some rando. So I had good teachers. Everything was new. The library is well stocked. They had the best technology. Um, there was no crime at school. And you had your fights and stuff, but
Mhm.
there wasn't, wasn't a bunch of weird druggies hanging outside your house. You didn't have to worry about somebody that's on the sex offender registry creeping around. None of that stuff. Uh, so you could just focus on learning um, and
Yeah.
things.
When I always tell people when I would describe some of the situations that happened at school that often led me to quitting or leaving other teachers to quit. They're like, "Oh, we had fights all the time at school." It's like, no, you don't understand. These aren't fights. These are assaults that are happening. These are
Mhm.
attempted murder fights, quote unquote, that's going on. It's not the same as okay, maybe a few people are punching it out. No, that's not the way it is nowadays.
Right. Yeah.
It's
And
murder.
like we had a guy show up, and I guess his mother just married a service member, and so he kind of like got, he's a foster kid, and he got brought in, and he was like, "Oh, I'm a blood," or something when he got there, and we were like, "Yeah, that ain't gonna fly here, bro.
Yeah.
Nobody gives a crap. It isn't like you're gonna call your boys. You're not gonna have a gun or anything like that, and you're gonna get a beat down if you keep up your crap." So he fixed himself up. He got correct, which basically meant just don't act like a jackhole and be cool.
Mhm.
You can still be who you want to be, but you know you wearing a red bandana or whatever doesn't mean anything to us here. So
Mhm.
it's all cool. Nobody's intimidated by you or anything, and so it's all good. But it's a different world when you live like that, and I'm sure it's changed. This was like the '80s and stuff, so
Mhm.
you know I'm sure everything has gotten a little more. Um, it's different, but yeah,
Yeah.
I do miss those
You know,
times.
yeah, total different time. Well, when we're talking about the kind of movies that we would have see, for example, you'd go and you'd look in the paper. It's like, oh, what's showing? It used to be, especially in the 80s when I'd be going to movies with my friends, you'd all pick or you'd all negotiate, okay, we're all going to go see this movie. And usually you'd have a really good time. It would be a pretty decent movie.
Well, there were so many good movies. Like, look at 1987. Look at what movies came out that year:
Hmm.
Predator, Full Metal Jacket, RoboCop. I forgot my years right. Um,
Lethal Weapon,
Lethal Weapon. Yeah.
Princess Bride.
Yes, Princess Bride. That's a great, amazing movie. Um, and all of them were quotable. The year before that was Aliens. That was huge for me as a kid. I
Yeah.
really wanted to see that. Terminator.
And
Here's the other thing: is being overseas like that, I saw most of those movies on a second generation VHS, like a copy of a copy on a
oh my.
VHS. Yeah. So on, like a little TV or something. Um, Very rarely did I see things in actual movie theater. I mean, they had a movie theater on base, but they were usually like 6 months behind or whatever. And then you never saw commercials on TV because it wasn't like technically American TV. It was Far East Network TV, so it was government, military run. The radio station was military. If you wanted, you could turn in Japanese stuff, which was cool. So I got to see
Mhm.
things like Fist of the North Star uh, as it came out every week. Um, Robotech as it came out every week. Uh, what's the other one? What do they call it in the States? Voltron. They call it Go Lion there, which means 5 lions. I saw that as it came out every week. Um, then later, when I was stationed there later on, I got to see Dragon Ball Z as it came out every week. Trying to think of some other ones. So I got
Mhm.
to, yeah, and understand them, but uh, you could you could see it on TV as it came out. So it was great. And that's the other thing that it kind of sucks to get old. But one of the good things about being old is you can remember what things were like. And people say, "Oh, there were no women and stuff back then." You can be like, that's a lie. You don't know what you're talking about, you
Yeah,
know. And you can
we
list
were
off.
there.
I was there. I remember seeing these things. Oh, that's another thing in the 70s as a kid. OG Battlestar Galactica every week
Mm.
when it came out. Wonder
Oh, yeah.
Woman when it came out. Incredible Hulk with Lou Ferrigno when it came out. Starsky and Hutch. um,
Oh, Dukes of
uh,
Hazzard?
yep, Dukes of Hazard. Land of the Lost. I mean, who didn't
Oh, I
have a
remember.
crush on that girl, and who didn't think Chaka was weird? Um,
Battle of the Planets was a
yeah.
cartoon I watched when I was a little
Yes,
girl about that time.
Thundar the Barbarian. Um, the Herculoids, although those were already in reruns by the time I was watching them because that came out in the 60s. Uh, let's see. All of the classics, Sanford and Son, All in the Family. Um, uh, what's the other one? What you talking about, Willis?
Different Strokes.
Different Strokes. Good Times. What's Happening? Phew. What's the one with? Man, it had all the girls that were at the boarding school.
Oh, sorry, Facts of Life.
Facts of Life. So all of these shows shaped who we were when we were growing up, and they were teaching us values and things like that. Um, that were, they were. When you were a kid, you said the Pledge of Allegiance in your classroom, and you were happy to say it. That reminds me, the very first date that I can remember, like and understood what it meant, was April 14th, 1974. That's what the teacher wrote on the board.
Oh,
So I think it was the 14th, but it was 1974. I can remember that clearly. Um, yeah, Arnold, Lost in Space. That was a little old for me. I think it was off the air by the time I was actually watching
mhm.
TV, which we had a black and white TV,
Oh,
or
yeah.
my grandmother had one of those giant combo ones that was like a record player, a stereo, a TV. And I think that was it. Yeah, no one was breaking in your house and stealing that. That thing weighed like 500 pounds.
Yeah, my grandparents had one of those as well. Yeah, and we still had a black and white TV, a very,
Yeah. Mhm.
small black and white TV. The Dallas, even though we were too little for that, but everyone was watching Dallas and the whole Who
Hmm.
Shot JR.
Oh yeah, the whole shot JR. Oh, Weeble Wobbles. We had those,
Oh,
and then me and my brother made a song for it for the Weeble
yeah.
Wobbles, and it so it goes, Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down, and that was part of the commercial. That commercial would say Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. You put them in the toilet and they float around. Flush the toilet, and down they go. That's the end of the Weeble show.
Oh
So
my goodness.
that was ours. Because when we were kids, two boys, we used to flush all kinds of stuff down the toilet and break it all the time. We even tried to flush our cat down the toilet one time. Like its feet went
Oh,
down the thing and it jumped out.
oh, poor thing.
Yeah. Well, we were, 5 and 6-year-old boys. Uh, we almost lit the house on fire. I can't tell you how many times.
Mm,
Um, but teachers treated you differently than they do now. Now everything is about, they don't let boys be boys. They want to medicate them because they're running around and all rambunctious and stuff. And but that's what boys do. Sometimes you just got to
yeah,
let them go, and let them just kind of run wild and burn themselves out. You got to be real careful though, because they can really go in a bad direction. It can be real destructive, like literally burn your house down, kind of stuff.
yeah.
Um, so.
Well, I've always felt that part of what went wrong, several things, uh, with that in education is, we we got big. Schools got
Hmm.
big, or
Hmm.
even if, the classes weren't that big, though they are tend to be now. So, it's almost like having been there as a teacher, you can't afford to have a
Hmm.
boy being a boy.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
"No, we can't do that." It's we're living in this huge complex here,
Well, when I was a
and then
kid,
they
we
take
had.
away yeah, and they take away recess, and then it's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, so yeah, I feel for the kids, I do.
We had way more male teachers when I was a kid than we did when I was in high school. So when I was in grade school, we had a lot of male teachers, and they would be able to regulate that. You know, tell you to
Mhm,
sit because you had to be stern. Sit. You had to fear them. Sit down. Shut up. You know,
yeah.
I had a science teacher who had been on a submarine in World War II, like when he was 18 or whatever. And he told us all kinds of wild stories about like sinking ships and watching people burn in the fuel and stuff when he was in the Pacific. But he didn't tolerate anything. He'd tell you you're dumb, sit down, shut up, you're a dummy, you don't know what you're talking about, you're an idiot, you're never going to amount to anything. And but some people nowadays they would just lose their mind. But I took it as he's just trying to make us better, you know?
Yeah. Well, what they
Because
would do nowadays, they'd assault him. They
right,
would
yeah.
they would try to kill him.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. This guy, he was one of those kind of guys where you were kind of scared of him. You know what I mean? Like he looked like he
Oh,
could
I
snap your neck.
understand.
Yeah,
No, I had
but
someone similar to that that was a Korean War vet that would share
mhm.
stories. Mm, yeah.
But you had more
Well,
respect for your teachers back then, too.
yeah. Well, it was just a whole different setup, the way things were, just society and everything. But also the teachers could hit you. I still
Mhm.
don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but you'd get paddled. You'd get hit with the ruler wrapped on the knuckles. It's like, knock it
Yeah,
off.
yeah, yeah. That that
Um,
uh yeah, that was something that could happen, and there was a real fear of it too. But also there was a real fear that you didn't want to mess up. At least for me anyway,
mhm.
because then my parents would have to deal with it, and they told me in no uncertain terms that you don't mess up, especially if you're overseas, because if you acted a fool there, they would send you
Oh,
back to the United States without your parents. You would have to figure it out. So there was a real fear and real consequences in the states. You'll just go down to the Wally Mart or whatever and hang out in the back and just become a loser and go to jail later. But there, you were going to get kicked out of the country. See you later. So
mhm.
there was and also that's the thing about being in the military is you can get in trouble for the actions of your spouse and kids to where
Ooh.
because if they're like stealing stuff or speeding or drunk driving or anything like that, it could be a big issue for you. So the first thing my parents told me when I was old enough to understand is the reality of that.
Mhm.
And then once you get your identification card so you can get on base and stuff, you never lose it. It's the worst thing that so they really put the fear of God in you for those things. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's what you need. Um,
Yeah. Well, not just that. I remember there was always a few incidences where these kids, American kids, would go overseas and not realize they don't tolerate law breaking. That it's not like, oh, they'll just say, "Oh, it's just an American, we'll let him
mhm.
off easy." It's like, no, they'll put you in jail for 25 years. And
Right, right.
uh,
And
there was
it
a
was a yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say just like being a bad kid over there would be like, ooh, I bought a beer out of a beer vending machine when I was 16. That was like the extent of like the breaking the rules kind of stuff. Because you're in Japan, drugs were not if they were available, they were insanely expensive. So you weren't
Mhm,
gonna, you know what I mean? They just weren't there. So you didn't have to worry about somebody smoking weed or getting all high and stuff. A lot of drinking though, because um, the drinking age was not what it was in the States, and the local Japanese didn't care. And I mean, they wouldn't sell to like a 5-year-old or something, but
mhm,
they couldn't really tell if you were like 16. They couldn't tell if you were too young or not, so they just sell it to you. And then you could literally buy it out of vending machines. So there's a lot of people getting pretty drunk, but I don't really see how that's much different than what you see in most American high schools, especially back then. Parents would buy alcohol for their kids like it was nothing, you know.
Yes.
And I remember like 12-year-old kids with like packs of smokes in their t-shirt rolled up, walking around. So, you know, in a way, you grew up earlier or faster back then, but also slower. Um,
True.
yeah.
But there was also an idea about the responsibility that went along with that. I
Mhm.
remember when I was living in Ireland, I had some friends whose parents were smokers, and when we'd go down to the shop at the end of the street to get candy, sometimes the parents would toss a fiver or something at the kid, say, "Hey, bring me a pack
Mhm.
of," what they would call them over there, British cigarettes, and yeah, the kid, we're 8 years old, they're like, "Oh, yeah, my mom wants this," and they just give you a pack of
Right.
cigarettes.
But see, the communities were smaller too, so everybody knew everybody, kind
That's
of.
true.
And then I remember there were as a kid that lived 2 doors down from me, lived in Delaware. His mom would write him a note, and he would go to the store, which felt like it was really far away, but I was so little it probably wasn't. He would go
Uh-huh.
to this corner store, and she would give him enough money. He would get a pack of smokes, a 6 pack of beer, and 100 Swedish fish for $1. You could get 100 Swedish
Nice.
fish. So he would get all that stuff and take it back with a note. And it would just say, "Hey, please sell my son this beer and cigarettes." And they'd be like, "Okay, cool." So
Yeah. And we
now,
would take them back to our parents, for
mhm,
one thing,
yeah,
and then
you
the
would,
kid
yeah,
wouldn't try to do anything bad of it with it.
right. Well, that's because he was only 8. Once you got
Well,
to
yeah,
be
once
about
you
like
get to be a teenager, that's no
12 or
problem.
something like that, yeah, that's how they got access. Or you would just stand outside a store and ask somebody to buy it for you, and they'd be like, "Okay, sure."
Mhm.
There was no F's given. Also, you could get caught by a cop drinking and driving back then. I mean, you couldn't have an accident or kill anybody, but just, they pulled you over, they'd be like, "All right, well, you're pretty close to home. Just pour that out and keep going." Now you're totally done. Same with the military. All kinds of crazy stuff used to happen, and it would just be a slap on the wrist. Now, just any little thing, and you're just slammed for it. Like you can't have any alcohol in your system, basically, uh, at all. Or that was like the. Have you seen the new Reacher show?
Yes.
Have you seen season 2?
Yes, I've seen all of it.
Okay, so where they have that this is a light spoiler, but they have a bar fight on base,
Mhm.
supposedly in an officers club. That the show would be over right then,
Yeah.
unless it was a show about how they did stuff after they all got kicked out of the military, because that would have
Yeah.
ended all of their careers right there. Some of them might have got to stay, but their chances for advancement would be extremely restricted. The officers all would have, yeah, that's it, you're done. Especially through somebody through a window like that. Holy, yeah.
I
To
I
officer conduct unbecoming an officer, destruction of government property. It just the list goes on and on and on. Um, to how now I get it's exciting and whatever, but that 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 kind of took me out of it because it was very unrealistic. That would if it had happened, you would have got away with something like that maybe in the '60s or something, possibly if you knew the right
my
people.
uncle was in the military in the '60s, he wouldn't have gotten away with that either.
Yeah. Well, I say you
Yeah,
might
that
you
was
might need to know somebody or something,
yeah, but yeah, if you mess with an officer, they would not be very
but
tolerant at
definitely
all.
when this was supposed to have taken a place was early
No,
2000s or whatever. Yeah, no, you'd have been
no way.
through. Um,
Yeah, it was a bit silly. I will
mhm.
admit, even I was going, "Wait a sec."
But just that part. I mean, some of the fight scenes were really good when they mess up those bikers and stuff. That was cool.
Mhm,
Uh, some of the other things where they're just running around shooting at each other with automatic weapons, not hitting anybody. Totally unrealistic. Uh, but it was fun. I will say this: I enjoyed it, but I like season 1 better. I thought
mhm. Yeah,
season 1
that's
was better.
what a lot of
Yeah.
people say. I still think it was good and entertaining,
Also,
but
I didn't
that's good.
see a need for him to get more jacked. I really didn't. He was big enough and looked good in the first one, so why he had to go to the gym and do all this? Unless he wanted to do them himself, that's fine. But if that was a contractual obligation, I don't see why he needed to
Yeah,
do any of that.
I
He looked
didn't have
fine
a
before.
problem with it. But yeah, I
So
know I know what you mean. Some people said he's a little too big, but I'm hoping it wasn't a contractual obligation because that would have been ridiculous. Well,
yeah.
speaking of entertaining, we're going to turn the gears a little bit. You wanted to talk a little bit about Robert E. Howard and Conan the Barbarian. What do you want us to know about Robert E. Howard and his little
So
guy from Hibernia?
so I found my first Conan, I think it was a comic book at the library, and I thought it was pronounced Conan at first because I was so little. But I saw it and I was like, "Oh, this is cool. This dude is like, really kicking ass." And then somebody was like, "Oh yeah, there's books and stuff." So I was like, "All right." So I went and got my first book and I read it. I think it was The Red Nails, was the first one. Um, so
Yay.
I read that, and then I just voraciously started reading all the rest of them. And then Conan the Barbarian movie came out. So I was probably maybe one book in and a couple comics, and then the movie came out. But it was maybe a year or two before I actually saw it on VHS. Um, and I mean, it was an amazing movie, but the books are so much better. And what's great about the books is if you gave one to somebody today and say, "Hey, read this book," you could tell by the language that maybe it was written a while ago, or it's just the style of the writer, and they're amazing stories. But what would really trip people out is to find out that the author wrote all that while in a small town in Texas, and he had never left the country. He may, I think, maybe I misspoke. He might have been down to Mexico one time or something like right on the border or whatever. But but that was it. But he never traveled. He didn't have like advanced scholarly degrees or anything. Everything he learned about the world, he learned from reading in the library, and he wrote all these amazing stories. And he published them in pulp magazines, kind of like H.P. Lovecraft did with the Cthulhu stuff. And he corresponded with H.P. Lovecraft to the point where some of their stories would cross over. Um, and it he wrote more than Conan. He wrote like stories about a boxer and his exploits, a steam tramper, which would be somebody that got on a steamship and just kind of worked their way from port to port, and he would have all these adventures in these ports, um, and different things like that. He had a couple of other
Solomon
stories
Kane.
that he did. Yes, Solomon Kane. He did Solomon Kane. He did King Kroll, and he did Conan, and he created the entire world for that. Um, Yeah, Stig is saying, yeah, Conan, while an awesome movie, doesn't really stick to the source material at all. Um, the the first one was really good. The second one was a little more cartoony, and they were trying to make it like more PG-13 or something. I don't know, but it was all right. And then that 2011 one was not that good. Um, it just didn't. It didn't hit for me. I think some people might have liked it, but for me, it just didn't hit. But the music in the first movie and the scenery and everything is just great. Why they didn't do a King Conan, I don't know what they're waiting for or what they're doing or whatever. That's just money on the table. If they did it right, I don't know if I want to see it now and be all
No.
wokeified and everything. But um, but that first movie has got so many great quotes. It has a great diverse cast. Um, and it's got a very powerful female character in it. Back before that was even like something that anybody kind of talked about. Um, she was great, uh, and it had it had a great villain that had some really good lines in it. But I'm digressing off the books because the movie is so good. Uh, One of my favorite parts in the movie is when they catch him trying to enter the Temple of Thulsa Doom, and he's got him like all tied up and stuff, and they're beating him up on the ground, and he's like, "You killed my family, all for steel." And he was like, "Oh, that was when I was young and I didn't understand what power is." He said, "I'll show you what true power is." And he was like, "Come on, child, come jump down from the top of this thing." She jumps and pierces through the wood, and just like, of course she dies. He's like, "That is power," you know.
Mm.
And I was like, "Man, that's such a great scene that he
Yeah.
did." Um, but
Yeah,
but
Steve's
yeah, the
pointing out because of Terminator 6 that
yeah.
yeah, that affected they're wanting to go ahead with King Conan.
Oh, after Terminator 6 flop, well, maybe they shouldn't have made it a woke piece of garbage.
Precisely. I mean,
And
they're stabbed themselves in the
yeah.
foot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like you guys couldn't see that that was gonna be trash. I could have told you the story wasn't gonna work. Were you gonna be
Mhm.
like, "Oh, now if any I don't wanna spoil it if anybody hasn't seen it, but let's do this thing in the very first 3 minutes of the movie that's gonna completely erase everything else that had been done, and then we're gonna make this other person the chosen one." It's like, "Get
Yeah,
the
well,
F out of here,
yeah.
man. You just destroy the other movies completely. What do you expect?" You know what I mean? And they brought back
Exactly.
a lot of the OG actors and underutilized them or did them wrong. And yeah, so I don't know. It's like
It's
a
a
it's crazy,
Yeah, it's
but
their own fault. Well, I'll tell you what you're saying about Red Nails, of course, was that the one that was published after he was dead, I believe,
it
right?
might have
After
been.
his
There
tragic
were
death. Yeah,
some,
I think that was his last one.
and then there were other ones where people took up the mantle and started writing for him. Uh,
Mhm,
and So even up to today, they're making new content for it, for the character, which is good. And there's so many different adventures that he has, and the world is so elaborate. And then, of course, I played the Conan Exiles video game, which kind of is based in that world. Now it's a lot of fun. I wish it had a little more lore, and the quests were a little more tight, but it was fun to play because it's like survival construction game or whatever. And it really has kind of that Conan flavor to it. But the books really inspired me, um, just like Disney used to do.
mhm.
Like watching Robin Hood, where they're animated animals,
Yeah.
and the Sword in the Stone, and um, all these different things that really kind of fired my imagination and wanted me to be more heroic in my life. Wanted to be those things. Um, and you start learning about, like, knights, and you get these ideals in your head that are ideals. They're not reality. In reality, people did a lot of bad things in the past, but
But
these
heroes
books.
always lifted you
Right.
higher, and Conan
Yes.
especially I found to be very honorable. He's a bit of a womanizer, but I he never does anything inappropriate, and the women
Right.
love him, and he's big and
Hmm.
strong.
Exactly. He
Uh,
never forces himself on a woman. Um, well, not really against her will. He might get a little rough when the time comes,
mm,
uh, but not in a bad way. He's not like beating them up or anything. Um,
yeah,
and yeah, so he's an adventurer. He's a young guy running around doing stuff, and he really has an impact on the world and shapes it. Um, and that really kind of spoke to me. Especially the stories were really cool too. Just all the stuff, it had wizards and vampires and you know ancient cultures and lost civilizations. Yes, Stig is right. Conan has a lot in common with Indiana Jones and James Bond. Right, and Indiana Jones, the original Indiana Jones, shot in that 1930s serial movie style of adventure, which harkens to the kinds of stories and kind of the the throughput of what Robert E. Howard was doing. Like he could have watched that movie and been, yeah, this he totally gets every part of it. It makes sense to him. It's what it's such a good story, and there's so many movies out there like that. But now everything is about identity politics and having the right kind of person playing the actor, the right actor playing the role. um and and that's what gets me, is they're like, oh well, this actor is, the character is this ethnicity or gender or whatever, so this kind of person must play them. Okay, but you got no problem changing Ariel from white and redhead? What about
well,
her? You know what I
yeah, it
mean?
only goes one way.
Yeah, no,
Yes,
yeah, exactly. Well, what I'm saying is that you want the actor to conform to what the character is. How about the character conform to what the character is? You know, and
that too. Yes.
unless you're going to do something markedly different, which is fine. But so if they were going to set that Little Mermaid in a totally different world, and things were going to not be anything like the story, then that would have been fine. But all you're doing is taking this one character and changing it, right? But then you
Mhm.
worry about who the actor is going to be that's going to play it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
doesn't make any sense to me.
the whole creative part of it, and I think that we're seeing the result because they're not. coming up with inspired things. But speaking of inspired, have you been reading the new ones they've been coming out with lately? The Conan books, saying they are doing prequel novels to the old Howard stories. Now, book 2 is out this summer. Yes, they did one for Red Nails, and then at the end of it, they had the original Red Nails in the hardback. I don't know if you've seen those.
Uh, no, I did reread some of them though, but it's been a long time since I picked them up because I've kind of been on a like 40K Warhammer kick. I've been
Uh-huh.
reading a lot of books from the Black Library, a lot of Warhammer Fantasy. Uh, Another really good series is the Troll Slayer series from that genre, where it's got Rick and Felix running around doing stuff. Now, a lot of these books are old, but uh, they're still putting out new stuff, and that's another fantasy world. So when I was in England in the early '90s, I walked by the shop and I saw all these little models in the window, and I looked up and it said Games Workshop on it. I was like, okay, what's this? So I walked in there, and it had Space Marines, it had all these like dragons and creatures and stuff, and then I met some guys uh, at the base that were into that stuff, and they kind of got me into it. And so then you buy the models and you paint them, so there's a real artistic side to it. And then it's like a tabletop game. You get rulers, and you got line of sight, and you roll dice and all this stuff, and you basically fight battles on a tabletop,
Mhm.
kind of like how the Germans used to do in the late 1800s for war games. So it's wargaming basically. And anyway, so I got into it there, but I also like the lore. And then I found the books and I started reading the books about the world. And it's a fully fleshed out fantasy world. It's got elves and orcs and all kinds of stuff. Um, and it started in the 80s, but I really like that fantasy setting. It's one of my favorite because it's got so much going on with it. Um, but So yeah, that
Sure.
my time in England really also kind of fired my imagination because there's nothing better than being able to go to a real castle, like a real
Darn
one,
right.
and
Yes.
walk around and be like, man, what would it be like if like a whole bunch of you know guys were coming over the hill or whatever, and
Oh, yeah, we used to play like
and
that all the time. Because in Ireland, it's even worse than in England. Because they would just have, like, these little round tower castle things,
Mhm.
and then 3 houses down, there's another one or another ruin, they
Right,
were
right,
very, very small, and you could play in them. Oh gosh, yeah, and it fires up your
hmm
imagination, and you'd mentioned behind the scenes, before we came on, that if a person were to not know, if you were to hand them, let's just say Red Nails by Robert E. Howard, and just say, "Read it," that there was no way that they would know that it was written when it was written, that
right.
it still holds the test of time.
They'd be like, wow, this is a great author. When are they putting out a new book? And Stig is saying that Blood of the Serpent was the one released in 2022, and it's a
Mhm.
prequel to Red Nails. It just ends where Red Nails begins. Really cool book. Yeah, and if you have the character and the franchise in the right hands with the right writer, you can do amazing things with it.
Yeah.
Um,
Robert Jordan did some good
mhm,
stories with, Conan the
yep.
Barbarian in the '80s. Mhm.
And
And
I'm
Titan
trying to,
Comics is doing some really good stuff right now with
yes,
Conan.
yes. And I'm trying to think of the last time that I really like saw something come out and I was like, wow, that really looks good. And I'm interested. Probably uh the animated Avatar Last Airbender was really good.
Mm.
I liked it anyway. I know it was a lot of people are saying it was for kids or whatever, but it was a lot deeper than that. I think it had a little something for everybody. I don't know if you've seen that show
I
before.
have not. That's not been my thing, but I've heard things about it. That's pretty good.
The animation was really good. At least I think so. And now that there's a new live action that's coming out in February, and I'm hoping it can repeat the success of One Piece. I'd never
Mm.
seen One Piece before. I think I'd maybe like seen like a little ad for it or something. So I didn't really know what it was. And the first couple of episodes, like, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. But people were saying it's really like accurate to the lore and it follows the story and the characters look like who they're supposed to be. And I was like, okay. And of course, there's always going to be some, person out there. Well, I think this actor is in my head canon. This one's trans, or maybe they really are supposed to be, or whatever. I don't know. But I just ignore all that stuff. You know, Again,
Yeah.
those are people that either trying to push an agenda or get the clicks. But yeah, I'm So I'm kind of a little excited about it, looking forward to it. But then again, I was excited for Rebel Moon, and I don't know if you've
Ah,
seen that.
well, no, I didn't even bother. No,
Yeah,
not at all. Didn't go near it.
it wasn't any good, um, for a lot of reasons. It had a lot of potential,
Mhm.
but it wasn't. But and that's what I just what are they doing with Conan? They just need to, you know, get somebody new, um, put a black wig on Alan Richardson. I mean, he's definitely jacked enough now that he could play something like that. But you got to have the right casting for it. But there's somebody out there that can do it. You know,
Yeah, if they would do
um,
it
right?
correctly. And the one medium where I think we can't trust them is in the visual media, like TV and movies, because for some reason they're letting print go. Like they're okay with, for example, the adaptations of the Wheel of Time comic, the ones, the comic
Mhm.
version, graphics. They're perfectly good adaptations, accurate casting to the characters. Their drawings, obviously. So people don't seem to care if it's being done properly in the comic form, and maybe that's where we need to just stay for a while until.
Well, because
Um,
I think they've that 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 genre is of comics is so tight. Like if you don't sell, there's nobody to come bail you out, or there's less of a chance of you getting bailed out than like you're a big
mhm,
media company or something. um, and it shows, and they try to hide it, much like Raban when the spice starts running out. He tries to hide the fact that they don't have enough spice, but
mhm.
it's the same way with these comic book companies. And then there's people that aren't getting paid, and then you just can't live like that, and it all collapses in on itself. You can only prop it up for so long. And if you have people, especially in the comic book era, that has always been a word of mouth kind of thing, really. Like if a
Mhm.
comic was good, you heard about it at school or the water cooler or whatever. Well, now you have the internet to really amplify that. Um, and people will figure out pretty quick if it's a crappy comic
Yeah.
because they'll vote with their wallet. Um, and I don't think that the people that are pulling the strings on this let's wokeify DEI everything really have their eye, their eye of Sauron is not really on that. They're looking at the big ticket stuff and the things that they know that they can get a bailout on if it goes south, right? Or that
Yes. So
there's
that's why
people
you only
supporting
see it
that agenda,
happening with.
right?
Yeah, you do
Exactly.
see it happen with
Mhm,
Superman, Batman, and stuff, but they're really leaving other stuff alone. So, yeah, there is still good comics out there, and I
mhm.
like what you said. You don't really have a lot of normies reading comics.
No, it's not. It's still a very niche thing, and it can get expensive real
Mhm,
quick, especially in today's economy to do those kinds of things. Whereas if I just sign up for Amazon Prime and they can crank out a bunch of stuff and I can sit there and mindlessly watch it. Whereas the other thing that I think they're not paying attention to books, especially, is because people don't read anymore, like not like they used to.
mhm,
I mean, I hear a lot of people say I read this book, and what they really mean is they listen to it on Audible,
mm,
and
yeah,
which is fine. That's a thing that technology is allowing you to do, especially if you're driving or something like that. You can take a like an 8 hour drive and cram through a book, which is great because you wouldn't be able to do that while you're driving next necessarily, if you're trying to read it all. But so people don't really read as much as they used to, so it's not a fulcrum for them to press to get the message across. So they just leave it alone because, there's only so much I think that they can do. And plus they want to go with the big ticket items so they can get the clout and show up on social media and make all these statements and interview. There's no actor to interview for the book. And unless you're, you know, J.R.R. Martin or whatever, um, nobody cares about you as an author, most part, unless you're Rollings or something. So then there's no point in being able to interview that person to like hear what kind of woke nonsense they might have to say or not. So they just leave the books alone. So they're kind of like flying under the radar now.
mm,
Um,
yeah,
but all it would take is somebody prominent to post something on Twitter, and they could get some momentum behind it if they found a book they really didn't like, that didn't have the correct messaging in it. But for most part, I think they just don't care. Um,
yeah. I agree.
Yeah, yeah, and love it ever after. Amazon equals Super Jack
Jack
QVC.
QVC.
I remember
That
when
is it.
QVC came out, my grandmother, oh my god, she got addicted to that. so
Yes.
bad. When she died, she had so much crap in her house from there, like unopened stuff that she meant to send to people that she bought. And my dad was like, "Why are you buying this?" And she was like, "Well, it was 50% off." And for some people, that's all it takes is they see that it's 50 or 80% off and they don't even look to see if it really is that much. They just see that, they think they're getting a deal, they get the dopamine hit and they order it.
Precisely. Yeah, that's the thing. Grandmas. I think
Yeah.
a lot of grandmas got into QVC because they didn't have anything like that, so they just lost their
Mhm.
minds when
Right.
it came out.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like the first time you sat down to Netflix and saw all of these movies and stuff, and you're like, "Wow, I could look at all this stuff, and I don't have to really pay for it." Um, and or like Xbox Game Pass, I can just download all these games and play them, and if they're not any good, I can just delete it, and I don't have to worry about that I wasted like $60 on it. Um, but I don't know. I think some of her friends really went into some serious debt from QVC, but they were
Mhm.
sitting by there like trying to call like the first 50 people, and I was trying to explain to her that's all bullshit. Call now. And she's like, "Oh, I got to call right away." Or the other one was Publishers Clearinghouse. She was heavy into that too. And they made the documents that you got from it look like they had like filigree around it and stuff. So she thought they were like stocks or something.
Oh
And
yeah, no, I remember my grandma.
yeah,
Yeah, they used to think it was serious.
right. And she was like, "Well, but I've invested so much." And I was like, it's just a chance every time. Like 1 in 10 billion or whatever it is, that it resets every time. It doesn't matter how much you buy from it, it doesn't increase your chances. But she was under the impression, and they would always like send this stuff that you might be a winner, and she'd be like, "Oh, I'm down to the top 1,000 or whatever," and so it prompted her to buy more.
Mhm.
Yeah, the Publishers Clearinghouse stuff. um yep.
Yeah.
So
Well,
she had,
before. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, she had a ton of stuff that we had to kind of divest. um
Sure. No, I
yeah.
understand. It's a thing, and that's also part of the new technology. Is the older generations they felt like it was sincere. It's like, well, if it's here, if it's being mailed to my house, it's for real,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
all of that awful stuff. Okay, well, thank you very much, Conroy. Now, before we go into roll 7, is there anything else you'd like to say about the topics at hand that you haven't
Um,
already?
the 70s and 80s were, so for me it was a good time, and I recognize for other people that there was legitimate hurdles for them. Um, and I did see it in my life, um, where I'm not going to say there was systemic racism, but there was stuff out there. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that that wasn't happening, um, especially back then. But we're a long way from then, and also the ideals. So everyone's like, "Oh, we had this and this isn't right and whatever." Okay, we admit that freely, and those are things we need to work on. But the ideals that we had, right, that we were taught, those are the things that are pure, and we need to work towards that, not just abandon it because it's not a reality or in the past something happened that was bad. What are you going to do? Just not move forward? So there's ways to
Mhm.
do that, but without having to like destroy the entire system to get where you're going. Um, but I don't know. It was a good time for me. I look back on it fondly. Um, of course, I had both my parents, and I got to travel, and I did live a different life than maybe your normal American because my father was in the military and we traveled around a lot. We'd go to overseas locations, and then I joined the military. Well, that was what I was saying before. Is when I was about 8 years old, I already knew what I wanted to do, so I just focused my life completely towards that. I didn't waste time trying to go to college or anything. I basically went to technical training and learned a trade. And so for 15 years, I worked on aircraft. I fixed them. They'd come back and I'd fix them and whatever. And then I promoted myself into management after that. So I had to do a lot of spreadsheets and meetings and dealing with other people's problems. Like, my husband smacked me around. So now we got to deal with it, that kind of stuff. So you
Yeah.
see a lot of things. So it was kind of like having a bunch of kids in a way. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I mean that you had a lot of responsibility for people. And at the right before I retired, um, I was at a point where I had 1,800 people underneath me. So
Wow.
trying to deal with multiple sections and different moving pieces and stuff. I mean, it wasn't just me. It was, there's a commander above me, and I had a bunch of other people in the office that were officers and stuff. But I supported them, and so it was a really good life. I really enjoyed it. For that 26 years, I had an amazing time. It was like living a dream. Um, I know not everybody has that experience with the military, but for me, it was. It wasn't always easy. It was tough sometimes. It had its ups and downs, and things like that. But you know, and we lost a few people along the way. But um, but yeah, it was a great experience. I got to travel to all these different places. I got to go to, Italy, Spain, Iceland, England, Japan, the Philippines, um, Hawaii, Vegas a bunch of times. Like Nevada, I got to go to California and Arizona, New Mexico, Delaware, Florida, um, just a bunch of different places. All the military paid for all of it to go there, so I didn't really have to pay for myself. The only problem was is that when they told you to move, you moved.
Yeah.
So if you had a nice house and everything set up and whatever, then you had to bounce. Especially when I was younger, it was a little tough because you'd make friends and then you'd leave. But it got me able to talk easily like this, make friends with people easily, say goodbye to people easily, and then meet up with them again years later, and you pick up like nothing, no time had really, transpired at all. I made a lot of really good friends, uh, and also I got to work with a lot of people from different backgrounds, different, ethnicities, different races, different genders, uh, and we worked as a team, and it was great. There wasn't, there's a lot of acrimony in the world right now, and people at each other's throat, and it just wasn't like that when where I worked at. Was it, you know, ice smooth? No, but
Mhm.
we worked at it, and we worked as a team, and we got our stuff done. And I'm proud of the things that I did while I was there. And you know, make no mistake, the end result of everything that I did was somebody on the other end getting killed somewhere. But um, I didn't really take it at that. I was doing my part and supporting it, and however the leadership decided to utilize it is how it got used. You know, so. But
Sure.
anyway, I
Well,
was I was real happy to do that. And now that I'm retired, it's kind of, what do I do now? And I've kind of been thinking about starting a channel, but then I'm like, do I really have anything to say that isn't already being said on someone else's channel? So I don't know. I have to think more about it, just because of the time investment and things like that. Because I understand in order to run a channel, it's not just, you put 5 minutes a day into it or something. It's a little bit more work than that, or a lot more work
oh,
depending on what you're doing.
yeah. No, understood. Yeah.
Mhm.
And but all that and more good stuff, and we'll get into that a little bit after the infamous roll. Whoops. Roll 7. Here we are. This is where I roll a d20 7 times, and it corresponds to a list of questions that were put together. Steve Kenobi's idea and vetted by my mother and himself. Those of you in the chat, please feel free to participate. So I'm going to go ahead and roll and ask the first question. It is Shield Wall. What's the most annoying question you've been asked besides this one?
Uh, let's see. Well, no one's asked me what my pronouns are. That'd been pretty annoying. um, uh, Most annoying question. That's kind of a hard one. I don't know. I just don't really.
Yeah. I know one for me when I was looking for a job. Have you found a job yet?
Oh, right.
It's like, I would
Yeah.
have told you. Thank you for reminding me I'm out of work.
Yeah. Um. Oh. Well, I don't want to. You know. When are you coming home? When are you coming
Oh,
home? Yeah. It's like, I'm out here doing stuff. I'm probably never. you know. It's just a family asking that kind of stuff, back then. or even now because I don't want to drive like 5 states away or whatever to get there. So,
Understood.
got any grapes?
Got any grapes? Are we there yet? All right. Question number 2. What is the title of the current chapter in your life?
um, it's called "What Am I Doing with My Life?" That was the thing about the military is, so when I was little, I knew what I wanted to do, so I worked towards it. When I was in, I knew it has a very structured progression path, right? Like,
Hmm.
if you can apply for these things, and it has some, branching options, but most of the way I just wanted to do what I was doing, and it's just a straight line through. You do, what the standards are for the most part. They rarely change, or if they do, they just modify a little. Um, and you know what the rules are. There's regulations for everything. There's a hierarchy. It's very structured, and you have a lot of support. So if you need things and have questions or help or whatever, they're there for it. Now that comes with a cost. You have to do what you're told, and it could be, hey, go over here and do this kind of thing that might get you killed, but you do it. You know, but you're not. And again, I didn't join to get rich or money or accolades or anything. It was just something I wanted to do. I wanted to serve my country, and I liked the culture and the lifestyle of it.
Oh.
And I got to work with so many different people from so many different backgrounds, um, and high quality people. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
I know. So I have, and also I got to travel and see the world. So I got a lot of respect. Um, and I forgot what the question was because I just kind of went off the deep end
What's
there.
the title of the current chapter of your life?
Oh
So I
yeah,
guess you
now
kind of
okay.
said it.
So I
Yeah.
retired, right? And now I don't know what to do with. It was so structured before, and now that I'm retired, and um, I am disabled from my military service. Nothing too bad, but enough to where I'm making the money's tight, but I can live. It's not like I've got oodles of money, and so it. But especially with the way the economy is going, I just dread going out and buying food now. But um, but anyway, so I got to figure that out. And I mean, I got time. I mean, if I wanted to do YouTube, I guess I could, but I don't know if that's something that I want to really dive into. Um,
Oh,
I
understood.
like what I'm doing now, like coming on shows like this and those kinds of things. I think that that's maybe where I'm most useful. Uh, I don't really
Mm.
know what I would do with my own channel,
Yeah.
um,
Well, the important
because
thing is that you're having fun, right? And
yes, yeah, I'm on Jacob Ironside's shows mostly on Tuesdays, and Roman of the Empire shows on Thursdays. And randomly, when people ask me to come on, or there's a real, a topic that I know I'm very knowledgeable about, like a certain movie or something, I might ask somebody, hey, if you need somebody, I'll come on your show. Those kinds of
mhm.
things. But yeah, I've been on a couple of things with Pops and um, some other people's stuff. Cosmic Comics and Cosmetics show. I've been on a couple of her things as well. Um, yeah, Danny's she's a great person. I know there's you know, maybe not everybody jives with her views, but I think she's cool. Um,
Alrighty. Let's go with
yeah.
question number 3. We have, what is your favorite excuse when you're late? BS excuse, rather.
Uh, Ooh, that was a bad thing to be late in the military. You
Yeah.
you didn't want to have like a BS excuse. You just really wanted to have a reason. That's the other thing. I always hated when I don't want excuses. Well, I'm telling you the reason why. There's a reason behind it. There's something that happened, right? An effect that
Mhm.
prevented me from doing whatever it was supposed to happen or whatever. And so it's not an excuse. It's a reason. I hated that from school, from like kindergarten on. I don't want to hear any excuses. Well, it's not an excuse. It's a reason. You want to know why this happened, right? So we can prevent it from happening in the future. Or
Mhm.
what you're asking me why I'm late? Well, I'm telling you why. You know what I mean? And sometimes it just be straight up, yeah, I overslept. It won't happen again, kind of thing. But you didn't really want that to happen. But usually, yeah, usually if I'm late, it's because I overslept or the car broke down or something like that.
Hmm.
But I'm very punctual mostly.
Okay.
So
Well, yeah, I guess a military man.
yeah.
It's a little bit different there. All right. What's the one thing you, besides your loved ones, what's the
Mhm.
one thing you can't live without?
let's see what I can't live without. Mm, I don't know. I'm to the age where, like, the answer would be different stuff in the past, but now it's just maybe traveling, I guess.
Mm.
Like, I wouldn't want to sit in the same town for. It doesn't have to be like wild traveling, just a little bit. Go see something. Like, uh, if you drive through West Texas, you can just randomly see buffaloes. Sometimes that's enough, like bison.
Aw.
Yeah. Um, but just go travel around a little bit. Go to Renaissance Fair or something, or an art show. I really I went to a flamenco show, the Spanish flamenco in
Mhm.
Santa Fe, and I really liked it. And so I'm kind of hooked on that. I like belly dancing. Um, Not me doing it, but
Oh, I was already saying, it's like, wow, that's a fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no. But I like the shows and the culture, and you kind of get hooked on that stuff traveling around.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. And Steve says books. Yes, I think that might be something close to me, but I would be as well. Tell me something on your bucket list.
ooh, um, a Viking river cruise. Sounds corny, but I always watch those commercials. It's like, man, that'd be so cool to do. You know, what's Dick
Okay.
saying? Books. What about
Oh yeah,
books?
books. Yeah, he can't live without books. Yeah,
Oh yeah, books. Yeah,
yeah. I don't. Yeah, I don't
yeah.
know if he has a bucket list, but that's okay. I
I
don't
mean,
know.
I
But one
wouldn't
of the
want to
things he
live
sees all the
without.
times
Yeah,
on my bucket list, which
yeah.
is Northern Lights.
Oh yeah. You didn't see any of those when you were in Iceland?
No, I mean, I went once in the summer and the other time in the winter, and I was there for a week. But the weather has to cooperate.
Right. Yeah. We could see it a little bit when we were there. If you looked up at the fingers, you know what I'm talking about, right? Where the fingers are. Kind of looks like the
Uh,
tail of Iceland
oh,
if you look at the
oh
map.
yes, yes.
Yeah, they call those the fingers. And if you looked up there, you could kind of see them from where we were at. They were very faint, but you could see them. You can make them out.
Aw. And Steve, you're a terrible person. He doesn't like my cat. Murder
Yeah.
Teresa's psycho cat is on my list. Well, fine.
But yeah, the
um.
Viking River cruise, that always just to go down the Rhine, specifically the Rhine, maybe the Danube, but the Rhine, and and just see all those castles and all that, all those buildings and stuff. Um,
No,
I don't know
that
how they
that
got
that.
there because apparently, according to some people, white people don't have culture, so they just
Oh
must have
dear.
sprung out of the ground.
Well, that's a good one. I wouldn't mind going on one of those cruises too and seeing it.
Yeah.
Okay, if you didn't have to sleep, what would you do with the extra time?
Oh, I've had conversations a lot of time in the military about this because you'd be at work 14, 17 hours and then you wouldn't be able to, but what would you do if you didn't have to sleep? Like you could live two lives basically. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know though, really. I like sleeping. Um,
Okay, I do too.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess if you'd always lived that way, then I think your life would be different. But if it was suddenly that you just now didn't need to sleep, I really don't know. Get a lot of books read maybe, or I don't know, finish
Mm.
some video games that I haven't been able to finish.
Oh,
Uh,
I approve of both of those. Yes, that would be something I would do too. Oh, Meteor Advocate Timon, he wants to visit the castles
there are
in
a lot of
Japan.
cool ones there, but most of them are reconstructions, so they're not like the legit thing. There's a few that are well preserved, um, that you can go see, but a lot of the other ones are rebuilt after being neglected or destroyed for various reasons.
Okay.
But yeah.
And the last but certainly not least, what fictional place would you like to go to and why?
Ooh, this is a wow. Where would I want to go? There's so many cool like places that are in genres that sound cool, but if you really went there, you'd probably die or something bad happened to you. Um, hmm, trying to think, where would be a nice fictional place to go?
I would
Maybe
want to go to
well,
Pemberley where I could see Mr. Darcy all the time, but that's
oh,
uh,
yeah, I'd like the Harry Potter world. That'd be cool.
uh, oh,
Yeah.
Hogwarts.
Yeah, like Hogwarts and stuff. Just walk around Diagon Alley or whatever, take the flame through fling wherever I wanted to go. Go to a Quidditch match, that kind of stuff. Eat whatever kind of weird pastries they got. Those kinds of
Oh,
stuff.
well, we heard it here first.
Well, it's
That
not
is
that they're
something.
ruins, it's that they're rebuilt off of ruins, but they're not, you know what I mean? It's not like
Mhm.
accurately depicted inside. Um, and some are just ruins, uh, those kinds of things. And
Okay.
the Japanese castles are different from European castles in a lot of different ways. Uh,
Yeah. Well,
but
different culture, different
yeah, it's still a
history,
fortification.
architecture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Different techniques and styles. Yeah. And technology, things like that. But yeah, yeah, I think because I played the Hogwarts Legacy game, and I know a lot of people don't like it. They're like, oh, it's just like a walking simulator or whatever. But I liked it. I loved the world. The world was amazing. The combat was had a lot of depth to it compared to what I thought it was going to be.
Mhm.
And just being able to walk around in there and kind of see everything. And a couple of the quests were really good. Most of them were just kind of but there was one or two that were really, really fun.
Yeah.
I
Well,
had a
and
good
for
time
people
playing
that
it.
like Harry Potter, yeah, living there, I think or being
Yeah.
around in that world, I think was the
And,
most
and
appealing part.
I've never read any of the books. I was
Oh.
so a lot of stuff that people are into, they were like, "Hey, do you remember the Transformers and all that?" I was a little old for all that stuff. I had other things
Mhm.
going on, or I was working 17-hour days, or I was deployed into the desert, or whatever when all this stuff was happening. So I didn't really get a chance to see it, or I was in, just my attention was on something else, like 40K or Warhammer Fantasy or something at the time.
Yep.
So I never really read the books because when they first came out, I thought they were kids' books, which they kind
Yeah.
of are. Well, at least the first
But
few are. Then I guess it
yeah,
progressively
you
gets
could
dark.
grow up with them. The
Right.
maturity level
But the
got higher.
movies I really liked. Like they drew
Mhm.
me in from the first, like this, not necessarily the story, but like the sets and the place and like the floating candles and all the food and the stuff like that. So I really liked it, and then to see it come alive in that game was like, okay. I would walk into the houses in the game, and I'd be like, I could live here. So
Yay.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. And
Alrighty. Well, once again, thank you very much for coming here on Pub Crawl. Is You've said it before, but I don't know if you wanted to mention again where we can find you.
well, I'm on Twitter, Shieldwall of Dragons, so I'm on there, and then I'm on Jacob Ironside's show on Tuesdays mostly. There'll be some times when I'm not available. I'm on Roman to the Empire shows on Thursdays. And both of those are at 5 Pacific when they start, both of those shows. And this week on Roman of the Empire show, we're going to be reviewing 12 Monkeys, the movie with Brad Pitt and uh, Stream Brain, the the guy from Die Hard, uh,
Bruce Willis?
Bruce Willis. Yes, I've only seen the movie once, and it was back when it like very first came out, kind of. So I have to rewatch that later. Um, oh, here's Salty C. Yep, books
Oh,
and
yeah.
booze.
Hi,
Yeah,
Salty. Thank you for being here. Okay. Well, so
yeah.
everyone, please be sure to go ahead and catch them here. And of course, you can find me here at Miss Smart Muses, where I talk about what makes me laugh, makes me cry, makes me happy, makes me sad, or just really ticks me off. More pub crawls coming up and some other videos, contents and random live streams as it works out for me. Now, I am putting a link right now in the chat that is to Jade Shadow's live stream. It's going to be starting in about 5 minutes. Steeg and Mara Jade are going to be doing their choices for the top 10 movies of 1983. So I want to send you all
Hmm,
over there if you are here and say
that's a
that
good
Teresa
topic.
sent you. Yeah. Oh, yeah. They get those are really a lot of fun, and then people in the chat can also say what they are. So once again, thank you to my guest and to all those that have been popping in: Salty Traveling Sea, Meteor Advocate Timon, Stieg, Genevieve was here. We had let's
Squeak a
see,
Mouse.
Mickey Mouse. Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. I mean,
Zax was here for a little bit, I think.
Love It
AJ.
Ever
Yeah.
After, Conroy Veritas,
Yeah.
and
Abomination
I miss.
AJ. Yeah.
Oh, it is true. But yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! Now my alarm's going off.
Gorilla's
Abomination
Random Thoughts.
Yes, all the random bots. Thank you very
Yeah.
much for being here. And Cannoli Sasquatch. And if I forgot anyone, please forgive me. The chat jumps and all of that good stuff. But thank you for being here. I couldn't have my channel without you. So if you wouldn't mind, give me a like, share, and a subscribe. 80 more to go till I reach the magic 1,000. I have been mostly monetized with the super chats, super stickers, and memberships. But once I get to 1,000, I will get to have adverts and get the AdSense kicked in. So if y'all wouldn't mind sharing, I would definitely appreciate it. And once again, thank you, Shieldwall, for coming on
Well,
and
thank you for
sharing.
having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so glad we were able to work it out. This has been a long time in the making, and it worked out just perfectly. All right, have a great day, everyone. Have a great day, and be certain to read some Robert E. Howard as well as go back to the 70s and remember what was best and bring it with you in your heart.